Welcome to the 700 Club. The election is still undecided. As the vote count continues to rise, the margins now are shrinking. Joe Biden has taken an overall lead, but the president says he's still the winner.
Well, this race is far from over, and the legal battle is just beginning. Caitlin Burke has the story.
As more ballots are added up in battleground states, the margins are going down. In his first press conference since election night, President Trump maintained he's won.
If you count the legal votes, I easily win.
Critics call Trump's claim baseless and unfounded. However, instances of voter fraud are beginning to be reported. The Republican Party in Nevada announced Thursday evening that it has sent a criminal referral to Attorney General William Barr with allegations of more than 3,000 cases of voter fraud, and tweeting that they expect that number to grow substantially, claiming thousands of individuals have been identified who cast ballots after moving out of the state. In Pennsylvania, where Joe Biden is cutting into the president's lead, an appellate court judge cleared the way for the Trump campaign to more closely observe the Philadelphia County Board of Elections as they count mail-in ballots. But Trump observers say they're being stopped from seeing what's going on. Trump campaign senior advisor Corey Lewandowski tweeted out a video showing a city attorney still preventing them from getting within 6 feet of election workers.
This makes it look like a kangaroo court. We deserve better, and we're not leaving till we witness every single vote that transpires in here.
In Georgia, with 99% of the ballots in, Biden pulled ahead early this morning by just a little over 900 votes. The Trump campaign now likely to request a recount considering the razor-thin margin. And while the president is steadily gaining ground on Biden in Arizona, the results won't be known in either North Carolina or Nevada for days yet. Neither state likely to share their final election results until next week. Former Vice President Biden urged patience in a short appearance Thursday.
We have no doubt that when the count is finished, Senator Harris and I will be declared the winners. So I ask everyone to stay calm, all the people to stay calm. The process is working.
Finally, it's not just the White House at stake. Whether or not Republicans maintain control of the Senate could come down to the races in North Carolina and Georgia. Both states are still extremely tight, and Georgia has 2 Senate seats up for grabs this year, with one or possibly both of them going to a runoff on January 5th. So it's possible that we may not know which party controls the Senate until early next year. Caitlin Burke, CBN News.
Well, our chief CBN News political analyst, David Brody, joins us now, and the thing keeps turning. Joe Biden now has a slight lead in Georgia, and I thought that was in the President Trump camp for a long time. You said yesterday you had a 4-down strategy. If he loses Georgia, how many downs does he have left?
Well, it looks like we may be going into 3rd down territory here, 3rd and 10, or as they like to say, 3rd and long. Gordon, you're right. I mean, if Georgia seems to now be heading over to the Biden camp, we'll see. We still got time, I guess, in this electoral madness. Pennsylvania, now, according to the latest results coming in, has flipped over to Biden by 5,000 votes. So that would be 2nd down. Georgia was 1st down. Pennsylvania was 2nd down. I think we're starting to get into 3rd down territory here, Gordon, which is recounts and recanvassing and some of the shenanigans potentially that are going on, which would be 4th down, which is the legal strategy. You know, it's just a whole electoral kit and caboodle, if you will, at this point.
Well, let's look at the legal down, if you will, the legal strategy. And a lot of people are saying, well, there's no evidence of voter fraud, but there's a voting machine problem in Michigan that cost the president 5,500 votes in just one county. And now we're hearing reports that that identical machine is used in 32 other counties in Michigan. So is there real evidence of voting irregularities?
Well, clearly that has come to light, and that's from the Detroit Free Press and other legitimate outlets, if you will. And so, right, I mean, the concern is that the software malfunction in that one county, well, if that software, which it was, being used in those 30-plus other counties, what does that mean exactly? And that will factor into that recount that we talked about. And look at what's going on in Nevada, for example. There's a federal lawsuit there by the Trump campaign. They're saying there's over 3,000 cases of voter fraud of some sort. In other words, they're saying dead people are voting in Nevada, and people that are not living in the state of Nevada are voting or on the voter rolls and have registered and have actually voted. Now, once again, that evidence, and that's been the big word here, what evidence do you have exactly? The Trump campaign says they have evidence. They're collecting the evidence. They've submitted to the Attorney General, at least in the Nevada case. So this is a trickle approach, and we're going to have to see kind of what goods the Trump campaign has when it comes to all of this.
Well, I know that law cases can take a long time, particularly if you're in, evidence gathering mode and you're trying to track it down. What would happen if we're still hung up in a court system and can't determine the outcome of the election? What would happen to the presidency? Does it go into limbo? Does it go into some kind of independent group? What's going to happen to the country?
Well, Gordon, let me tell you a scenario that hasn't been talked about too much, but get ready for this to be talked about more. The contingent election. A lot of people, when they hear contingent election, they think, well, that means what happens if there's a tie, 269 to 269? That's not what I'm talking about. There's another scenario for a contingent election, and that has to do with dual electors, dueling electors. That's right. We've never gone down this road. Well, to a degree we have. I'll explain that in a moment. The bottom line here is what could happen is that the Trump campaign will say, wait a minute, Pennsylvania, Georgia, Nevada, and go on, Michigan, they're all going to be contended in court, right? So what they'll do is by December 14th, the time that electors actually have to be, they meet, there could be two slates of electors at that point. In other words, the Constitution allows for state legislatures, and if, for example, if they're controlled by Republicans, and in many of these states they are, the state legislature could actually have a separate dual elector slate that is for Trump. So, for example, in Arizona, the state legislature there, controlled by Republicans, could have 11 electors for Trump. The governor would be bound by the results of the election. And let's say Arizona goes for Biden, for example. Well, there's 11 for Biden. So now you have two dual electors in that state. It could happen in all these multiple states. And then what happens is it gets moved up to the Congress, the Senate and the House on January 6th. This is all real possibility at this point. Then the Senate and the House would have to decide what elector slate they're going to agree to. The House, of course, controlled by Democrats, would go for the Biden electors. The Senate, if it's controlled by Republicans, that's a big if at this point, we'll see, would then go for the Trump electors. And then we've never been in that's uncharted territory at that point. We don't know. There's something called the Electoral Vote Act, Electoral Count Act, which is murky in terms of a constitutional issue as to what happens at that point if the House decides it's the Biden electors and the Senate decides it's the Trump electors. But this is a real possibility, and you can be sure Donald Trump will exhaust all avenues. So we talked about the four-down strategy, and the fourth down was the Hail Mary at the Supreme Court. Well, what I just laid out, is kind of like a Hail Mary, and then all of a sudden there's a flag on the field, and we have to do the Hail Mary one more time, and that could be dual electors.
Well, let's talk about control of the Senate. Earlier this week, we thought Republicans had kept it. And now one of the races in Georgia apparently is not getting 50% of the vote. And so there's going to be yet another election in Georgia. So are we going to see a Republican-controlled Senate, or is it going to flip?
Hard to say, Gordon. I would say this, the chances of Republicans keeping the Senate are still good. Are they great? Probably not, but they're good. Georgia, once again, I say a typically reliable Republican state. Well, look what we're seeing right now going on in Georgia. So everything has been, it's all been shaken up quite a bit. So it's hard to tell. But on paper, you would think Republicans would have the advantage. But once again, it's going to be there's going to be a lot of national money being thrown into Georgia. So, you know, we're talking about the presidential race. Well, let's wait until December to see how that shakes out, or longer. And then we're going to see what happens in Georgia, because in the month of December, you can be sure there's going to be a lot of activity down in the state of Georgia.
Well, David, thank you for your analysis, and thank you for all you're doing. It looks like you're going to be working overtime for some time, keeping us up to speed. Just on a general note, 2020 seems to be the year that keeps on giving. And here we are. We can't figure out our own election. You go back to 2000, and we couldn't figure out who won the presidency. And I remember those days, and it turned into turmoil, all about hanging chads and what was the election result in Florida. The good news coming out of 2000 was Florida got its act together and figured out how to count votes. And I hope this is a wake-up call for every single state legislature, every electoral board. You have to make sure you can count these votes, and you can count them on the day of the election. This kind of thing turns us all into turmoil. It's going to turn into lawsuits. This is going to be undecided. And in the meantime, life goes on, the pandemic goes on, and we need to have secure leadership, and we can't figure out who won the election. Let me add something else that 2020 is giving, and this is news out of Europe. If you can believe this, there are mink farms in Denmark, and they have identified a brand new mutation of coronavirus. So of all the times for us to be divided and not knowing who won an election, it's yet another variation of COVID-19 coming down. Apparently it was some kind of protein mutation that got into minks, but it's now traveled back into human beings, the people who are handling the animals. They're killing all of the minks to make sure that the virus doesn't spread, but it's already in the human population. So welcome to 2020. I, for one, hope the next month and a half go by very quickly so we can get out of this year. In other news, the Temple Mount in Jerusalem is one of the most important locations in all of Judaism. This week, the United Nations General Assembly voted to approve a resolution that calls the Temple Mount an Islamic holy site while ignoring its Jewish roots. Chris Mitchell brings us that story from Jerusalem.
Israel's ambassador to the UN said the vote proved the UN General Assembly was, quote, detached from reality, and said it was a disgrace. He pointed out that in contrast to the UN vote, a growing number of nations are acknowledging that Jerusalem is the undeniable capital of the Jewish people and the Jewish state. The representative of the Palestinian Authority said the resolution was fully in line with international law. While 138 countries approved the measure, 9 voted against it, including Israel and the United States. The vote comes while the United States is encouraging more nations to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and move their embassies there. The African nation of Malawi is the latest country to signal it will move its embassy. Malawi's foreign minister met Thursday with Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. So far, only the United States and Guatemala have moved their embassies to Jerusalem. One encouraging note for Israel is that the number of countries that supported the text of the UN resolution dropped from 154 last year to 138 this year. That could be a sign of growing recognition of Israel's claim to its ancient capital and the influence of the Abraham Accords. According to the Bible, the Temple Mount is the location of the first and second Jewish temples, first built under King Solomon, then rebuilt hundreds of years later after Israel went into exile. Chris Mitchell, CBN News, Jerusalem.
Well, you can claim all you want that this is proper under international law, but it's certainly not proper under archaeology, under the actual history of the Temple Mount. You can go to the Western Wall, and you can see clearly the stones that Herod put in place. They're right there in front of your eyes, that this was the site of the Jewish temple, the first and the second temple, the Temple of Solomon, the temple that was built after the Babylonian exile and then expanded on by King Herod. This is part of the history of the land and certainly part of the Jewish history, but I would submit it's part of world history. The things that happened on that Temple Mount, the words that were written, the words that were inspired by God, those things are the founding words for our civilization. And the world to not recognize that is absolutely astounding to me.